teacher candidates. Welcome back to EDU 111 Early Childhood Development. I am Tiffany Bland, the moderator for this course. As you're aware, EDU 111 is offered to all Year 1 teacher candidates who are pursuing studies in early childhood education here at the college. Over the next few weeks, we'll be presenting to you the content for this course via units. However, these sessions are not substitutions for your attendance to your synchronous sessions, that is your online tutorial with your assigned tutor. In this session, we will dive into Unit 1, Biological Beginnings, using our course text, Newman and Newman's 2012, Development Through Life, a Psychological Approach. Have you ever thought of when an individual life begins? At birth? At conception? At the birth of one's parents? We are each linked back in time through a lifeline consisting of our ancestry, culture, and genetic makeup. Within this unit, there are 5 topics. Those are genetic foundations, hereditary, and the processes of birth from conception until the postpartum period. As you interact with the resources and materials of this unit, it is done with the following objectives for each teacher candidate in mind. By the end of this session, you should be capable of describing genes and saying how they influence the development of humans. You will examine genetic processes and principles and see how they are linked to chromosomes and gene-linked abnormalities. Then, you should be able to describe how conception occurs, the prenatal development, and all processes and changes that are involved until the mother delivers the baby or babies. So, teacher candidates, let's get started. Genetic information links each new person to the human species in general and also to specific ancestry genetics. When we discuss inherited characteristics, we're really referring to 2 different kinds of heredity. The first includes all genetic information that comes to us as members of the human species. Most inherited genetic information is shared by all human beings, such as our pattern of motor behaviors like walking upright, jumping, and running, the size of our brains, our body structure, including the proportion of our head, our torso, and our limbs. But did you know that 2 of the most relevant species-related characteristics are the readiness to learn and the inclination to participate in social interaction? The second kind of heredity consists of characteristics that have been transmitted through a specific ancestry. Our hair color, skin color, blood group, and height are a result from genetic information passed from one generation to the next. Given all the shared information that is carried on the genome, these individual differences amount to only 0.1% of all DNA. This is according to McGuffin, Riley, and Plummer 2001. Certain genetic characteristics are said to be sex-linked because the gene for the specific characteristics is found on the sex chromosomes, X and Y. The female ovum only carries the X chromosomes. Half of the male sperm carries the X chromosome, and the other half carries the Y chromosomes. Male children can be produced only when the sperm carrying the Y chromosome fertilizes an egg. As a result, is an XY combination on the 23rd chromosome pair. All sperm carrying X chromosomes will produce female children. When a trait is carried on the Y chromosome, it is inherited and transmitted only by the male offspring, because only male offspring have the Y chromosome. Sex-linked traits that are carried on the X chromosome are more likely to be observed in the male offspring than in the female offspring, because male children do not have the second X chromosome that offset the effects of the X-linked trait. According to National Institutes of Health 2007, certain genetic diseases are linked directly to our ancestry. Therefore, their incidence is higher in certain populations than in others. Let's look at some genetic disorders. Some genetic disorders that occur due to an autosomal dominant gene are Huntington's chorea, and Marfan syndrome. Due to an autosomal recessive gene, some genetic disorders that may occur are albinism, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, and Tay Sachs disease. Two genetic disorders that occur due to the X-linked recessive genes are color blindness and hemophilia. Now to chromosomal disorders. Due to an autosomal abnormality, an individual may develop Down syndrome. Some sex chromosome abnormalities are Turner's syndrome and Klinefelter's syndrome. Now that you're aware of our genetic foundation, let's take a look at what many consider as the beginning of our life, conception. Genetic information guides the production of proteins, the formation of body structures, and their interrelated functions. One normal ejaculation contains several hundred million sperms. Each microscopic sperm is composed of a pointed head and a tail. The head contains the genetic material necessary for reproduction. The tail moves like a whip as the sperm swims through the cervix and the uterus and into the fallopian tubes. In contrast to a man who produces billions of sperm in a lifetime, a woman ordinarily releases just one ovum or egg each month midway through the menstruation cycle. Like the sperm, the ovum is a single cell that contains genetic material. When the ovum is mature, it is encased in a sac of fluid and floats to the surface of the ovary. The sac ruptures and releases the ovum into one of the two fallopian tubes. Millions of feathery, hairy-like structures in the fallopian tube sweep around the ovum and gently moves it towards the uterus. Only one sperm can enter the egg. As the first sperm passes through the egg's cell membrane, a rapid change in the membrane chemistry, effectively locking out all other sperm. If the ovum is not fertilized within the first 24 hours of its maturity, it begins to disintegrate and is shed along with the lining of the uterus in the next menstrual period. Once inside the egg cell, the sperm loses its tail and the head becomes a normal cell nucleus. The period of pregnancy, typically 40 weeks after the last menstrual period or 38 weeks from ovulation, is often conceptualized in 3-month periods or trimester. Development is so rapid and dramatic in the first trimester that it is further divided into 3 periods: the germinal period, the embryonic period, and the fetal period. Each trimester brings changes in the status of the developing fetus and its supporting systems. The pregnant woman also experiences changes during the trimesters. In the first trimester, many women are not certain they are pregnant. But by the last trimester, though, the woman is usually certain, and so is everyone else. Let's take a look at what occurs in each trimester according to Moore and Prasad, 2003. After fertilization, the egg begins to divide. At this time, the cell material is referred to as a zygote until implantation. When implantation is successful, by the 6th day after fertilization, the egg makes contact with the lining of the uterus and begins to attach itself there. At this point, the cells are referred to as an embryo. The 3 weeks following implantation are devoted primarily to elaboration of the supportive elements that will house that embryo. An amniotic sac surrounds the embryo and fills with a clear, watery fluid. This fluid acts as a cushion and buffers the embryo and permits it to move about and change position. Once the embryo is firmly implanted into the uterus, special cells in the placenta produce a hormone that maintains the uterine lining. The placenta is an organ that is newly formed with each pregnancy and is expelled at birth. Nutrients necessary for the embryo's growth pass through the placenta, as does the embryo's waste, which then passes into the mother's. In the 3rd or 4th weeks, the embryo cells differentiate rapidly taking on the specialized structures that will permit them to carry out their unique functions in the body. Similar cells are grouped into tissues that gradually emerge as the body's organs. The first essential changes include the establishment of the body form as an elongated cylinder and the formation of the precursors of the brain and the heart. The neural tube, which is the structural basis for the central nervous system, begins to take shape at the end of the 3rd week after conception and continues to develop through childhood and adolescence. By the end of the 2nd month, the embryo looks quite human. It weighs about 2.25 grams and is about 28 millimeters long. That's about 1 inch. Almost all of the internal organs are formed, as well as the external features of the face, limbs, fingers, and toes. At 8 weeks, the embryo will respond to mild stimuli. During the 2nd trimester, the average fetus grows to 10 inches and increases in weight to almost 2 pounds. The reality of a growing life becomes more evident to the pregnant woman during this trimester as she observes changes in her body and experiences early fetal movements called quickening. During the 4th month, the fetus begins to suck and swallow. Whenever the fetus opens its mouth, amniotic fluid enters and cycles through the system. This fluid provides some nutrients in addition to those absorbed through the placenta. The 4-month-old fetus shows some preference for a sweet taste. If sugar is introduced into the amniotic fluid, it will swallow the fluid at a faster rate. The fetus is sensitive to touch and may react to it with muscle movement. It will also stick out its tongue in response to a bitter taste. At 25 weeks, the fetus functions well within its uterine environment. It swallows, digests, excretes, moves about, sucks its thumb, rests, grows. However, the nervous system, which begins to develop at 3 weeks, is still not mature enough to coordinate the many systems that must function simultaneously to ensure survival. Let's take a look at the 3rd trimester. In the last trimester, the average fetus grows from 10 to 20 inches and increases in weight from 2 to 7 or 7.5 pounds. The birth process. Birth is initiated by involuntary contractions in the uterine muscles, commonly referred to as labor. The length of time from the beginning of labor to the birth of the infant is highly variable. The average time is 14 hours for women undergoing their first labor and 8 hours for women undergoing later labors. The uterine contractions serve 2 central functions: effacement and dilation. Effacement or thinning is a shortening of the cervical canal. Dilation is a gradual enlargement of the cervix from an opening only millimeters wide to one that is about 10 centimeters, large enough for the baby to pass through. Effacement or thinning is a shortening of the cervical canal. Dilation is a gradual enlargement of the cervix from an opening only a few millimeters wide to one that is about 10 centimeters, large enough for the baby to pass through. Effacement and dilation occur without deliberate effort by the mother. Once the cervix is fully enlarged, the mother can assist in the birth by exerting pressure on the abdominal walls of the uterus. In layman's terms, pushing. The baby too helps in the birth process by squirming and turning its head and pushing against the birth canal, which then leads to its expulsion from the birth canal. In some cases, a cesarean delivery occurs. They may be planned or unplanned. The procedure may be used if labor is severely prolonged and the fetus appears to be at risk due to lack of oxygen. It may also be used when the infant is in the breech position, feet or buttocks first, rather than the head first. Or if the mother's pelvis is too small for the infant's head to pass through. The cesarean delivery makes childbirth a surgical procedure, requiring anesthetics, intravenous feeding of the mother, and a prolonged period of recovery. So after all the excitement of the birth process, let's take a look at the beginning of the recovery process the postpartum period. During the postpartum period, several events occur, but it is important to keep in mind that these occurrences may differ from person to person based on the birth process and health of the mother and the newborn. After birth or delivery, the mother and infant have their initial contact. Next, the placenta is expelled from the womb. After birth, there is rapid alteration of the hormone system of the mother to stimulate lactation and shrink the uterus. Then the mother and infant engage in early learning behavior. The infant attempts to nurse. The mother explores the infant and begins to interpret his or her needs, such as hunger, diaper changes, and discomfort. And finally, the mother and newborn return to the home and the newborn is introduced to the family setting. Wow, what a journey! To close this unit, here's an activity to gauge how much you've learned. Try to answer these questions. Discuss the role of genes and their influence in human development. Differentiate between chromosomes and gene-linked abnormalities. And your final question, explain the changes that take place in the postpartum. Until we meet again, I am Tiffany Bland for EDU 111, Early Childhood Development. Bye.